afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenny. I am on staff here at Iron Bell Ministries, and today I'm going to be interviewing my parents, Gregg and Shelley Dedrick, who are the founders. And we're going to talk a little bit about marriage and conflict today. As we all know, conflict is very normal in all of our relationships, sometimes especially in our marriages, but we've all been feeling things have been pretty heightened and amplified due to the quarantine and us all being home together, lots of togetherness. So we thought this would be a good time to bring them in to just talk about how to navigate conflict well, and to give you guys some tips and some tools on how to practice this at home. So we are going to let them speak on the topic a little bit, and then at the end of this, I will let you guys know when it's time, but we'll have a question and answer time, so feel free to type any questions you have in the comment box, and I'll funnel that their way. So let's get started.
Before you jump in, I know you have the first part. I just wanted to illustrate what I think is the secret to a thriving marriage. And I learned it from this couple that had been married for like 40 years, and both of them described that they were completely content. Their marriage was thriving. And so they were asked, what is the secret? And they said, well, it's very simple. It's a 2-hour walk. And we walk down to the center of town. They live near this little town. We go into the cafe we love. We get a drink, grab a paper, go sit out. There's a little park bench if it's nice. Sit out there, listen to the birds, and do all that. Take our time and walk back slowly. It's a 2-hour walk. I go at 5. He goes at 6. So there you go. That's the secret to a thriving marriage. Hopefully that helped.
We're not laughing because we've heard that joke about 500 times. But
That's good though, honey. Yeah. Well, this quarantine time, Gregg and I, we do a lot of marriage coaching, and the first thing that we always start with is our God-given temperaments, personalities. And we say what you fell in love with and that what you're crazy about. I love Gregg's humor and his, jokes, but sometimes what you fell in love with starts to annoy you. And
like my opening joke.
Yeah, right. So I just wanted to, I feel like, we have so much time, all of us, where we've been in our homes and we're together. So everything's heightened, everything's magnified, everything's intensified. And I think we're really starting to, see our personalities really come out in its probably not so good ways, because we're just all frustrated and all kinds of things are going on. So I wanted to quickly, briefly mention some personality types and kind of what happens when those start to clash and when we're quarantined and we kind of get in each other's ways and really start, what's really going on here. So the first personality is like my lovely husband here, Gregg, and those of you know Gregg know he's a very happy guy, and it's that personality that's very, outgoing and fun. They need a lot of fun, they need a lot of friends, they need a lot of activity, they want to always have a good time, they like to talk a lot. And then the extreme of that is the melancholy, if you will, the one that is striving for perfection. And that is totally opposite of the happy person. Not that they're not happy, because they are, but they need, they're very serious and purposeful and quiet, and they need downtime, they need predictability, they need a schedule. And so you can see where these two, if you're spouses and you have one that really has that spark, that happy, outgoing, fun personality that always wants to be entertained or entertaining, and then you have the one that kind of like fell in love with that, but now you're starting to irritate me because I'm just like overwhelmed with, we've got to homeschool the kids and I can't get, to my work, and we're just like everybody's in one place, so they're feeling overwhelmed and choked by that.
So that would be like the spark coming up against wet wood.
Yeah.
Not much happening in terms of fire. No combustion there.
And then you have another temperament that's really, very high achiever, a go-getter, goal-oriented, productive. This is a person that wants control. They have their to-do list. They want to be doing things around the house. Gregg is really, has all kinds of ideas. And we've cleaned basements and closets and garages and cupboards and all of that. And for him, every day, that's like, yay, I've checked my list. We've done a lot of
and we
work.
get to do it together.
Yeah, we get to do it together. But I am that easygoing, laid-back temperament. So there's times when I've had to look at him and say, okay, I've given you 2 full days, but tomorrow I can't do any work. It's like I'm done. Or sometimes he'll say, hey, let's go tackle the garage. And I'll say, okay, I can give you 2 hours, but I can't give you all day. Because he knows that would really wear me out and stress me out, where he loves that. He loves to get in there and achieve it and feels really good about his productivity. And so this person also in the family sometimes could want to start wanting to control the family. Okay, Joe, I want you to do this, and Jenny, I've got this for you to do, and okay, family, let's go. And so you have all these personalities that all of a sudden are like, the melancholy's like, I need to get away from you, and this one's like, I need fun, I don't want work, and this one's like, I'm tired and I just want to just go out and look at the stars. So you can see in normal situations, or let's say the time before we were in, where these already were kind of clashing in our marriages, but now they're like really magnified, and we're coming up against them, and we're really probably it's causing a lot of conflict. So I think it's to be aware of that, and we'll talk a little bit about how to navigate those waters.
Yeah, and I think just in our situation, you alluded to it a little bit, but for my personality type, I like to be active, I like adventure, I like to be engaged, I like to accomplish things, I like to have fun, I like to be social. Well, guess what? That's not exactly happening in big ways during quarantine.
And for him to look for social activity and fun, the melancholy phlegmatic, it ain't gonna happen because it's not even on my radar. I don't think like that.
Yeah. So I'm trying to drag her into adventure or fun or whatever, and she's needing time to just space to herself. She's needing a little bit more structure. You'd like to have some
little, not much.
Yeah, a little bit more of some things that to anchor you that you can do, not overly structured. And there's none of those right now, right? It's just open time. So there's that happy in between's missing for you. So we really have to balance that and try to work through that and figure out what's the best way to do that.
Yeah, and that temperament that likes order, like I said, and predictability, and they like to perfect their world, and they like to make their lists the night before. Now you've got kids around, you've got your marriages, your spouses are home from work, and that is being poked at all day long and interrupted. And they can't have things the way they want them, and they probably feel out of control, and that's going to be really causing them frustration, and they might have fits of anger come out when necessarily maybe you wouldn't see that, because their world is kind of tipped upside down.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I notice and I've heard from other couples is during this time frame, because of that, physical energy might be okay for those of you not as active, but emotional energy is depleted. Okay, a quarantine can be exhausting emotionally.
Yeah.
And that constant, working through the different personalities in a home or homeschooling or the different dynamics you've had to adapt to. And I think understanding how you recharge is really important in this season.
It is, and we really need to make sure that we're making that happen during this time. And so marriages, if you have that happy spouse that's wanting fun, I think you're going to have to create some fun, whether it's, we've seen a lot of birthdays, you have a celebration. Lots of times those happy people are very creative. So I think somewhere in your schedule, in your week, in your day, you've created something really fun for either each other in your marriage. They usually like surprises. And so they're, maybe you really haven't been able to have friends over and things, but just to be creative on how you can help that person feel like they're having more, because that'll energize them.
Yeah.
And then if you have the other one that's opposite, that needs alone time, I said, we want to honor each other. I need alone time. And in fact, if I don't have it, I feel choked. And I have to have it. I'm a better wife. I'm a better friend. I'm a better parent. And so Gregg really honors me by saying, hey, I know that, today we did a lot. Why don't you, hey, I'll take over or something tomorrow. Why don't you go, out for a walk for 2 hours? And I just need that, because that is my emotional tank that I'm breathing in life. And then I can come back into more of a situation, which a lot of people, there's chaotic right now, right? So much going on, but I need that to I call it the air I breathe. And so for you, you might want to get some things done, right?
Yeah, get some things done, probably be on a couple of calls on a Zoom meeting. But I think the 3 things I kind of hear us saying, the first thing is to be aware of your personality style, particularly how you recharge.
Yeah.
What's going to recharge your emotional energy so that you can enter back into relationships in a healthy way? Because if you're depleted, you've got nothing to give, right? So you got to take care of yourself in that sense. The second thing is to honor your spouse by letting them have the space they need if they need time alone, or where you go the extra mile, extend yourself to be engaged with them socially in ways that restore them, and vice versa. So you're giving and taking. The third thing is, and this is the level that really opens up a relationship, and that is when I know Shelley well enough and she knows me, and we, without asking, we go to the other person and say, hey, I know you really need some alone time. Why don't you do that? That example she described, that says to her, I know her, I value her, and I want to serve her in that way. Or she comes to me and says, hey, why don't we go do this? And that's where we want to be as best we can, is to be in those places where we not only know it, but we are serving each other in it.
Right. Yeah, that you feel seen and valued, and he meets my needs because he knows that I don't do well if I don't have some quiet or some time just at the piano or go for a walk. I feel very valued and loved, and that which creates emotional intimacy. It's a turning towards, which is what we want to create in a marriage.
So I'd love to thank you for sharing that, and I think we can all relate to that. And I have a husband who's a melancholy, and I have a son who is a high sanguine. So we've
yes, you do. He's the definition. His picture is next to it in the personality books.
Likes to talk all the time and likes to play all the time, and so we've actually had a schedule in our home where each of us get breaks, or each of us get the things that we need, and then we know each day kind of when we're going to take a break and when we're going to engage, and that's actually been really helpful for us.
That's good.
But so I'd love to know, we're talking about just normal dynamics in our relationships that exist and that cause conflict. We've talked about how that's all being heightened right now because we're together. We're also under more stress than we typically are because we've never experienced a pandemic before like this. So we all have our own fears and our own anxieties. And so kind of what I want to interject before you kind of move into your next part here is that you are not alone if you're feeling like you have an increase of conflict and stress in your home. I know that on social media, we can tend to portray kind of our best quarantine moments, but we all have quarantine moments that are happening that we want no one to see. So kind of what I've been saying in all of our interviews that have been kind of focusing on this season we're in is there is so much grace for what you're navigating, for what you're experiencing, and for you to receive that grace from the Lord for yourself and to extend that to those in your home, because this is such a difficult time and it's longer than we expected. It's more stressful than we expected. Everything has been interrupted. So I always like to say in these interviews, please know you're not alone. You're not the only one. This is touching every home, every person.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that's very good. And what ends up happening then is those cracks in our relationship, so to speak, can cause conflict and cause us to have to figure out how to navigate through it. And in fact, just the other day we were talking about something in the middle of discussing it. I just kind of blew up and just said, what? Well, whatever it was, I just kind of let off some steam. And
I said, why are you yelling at me?
And I said, I'm not really yelling at you. I'm yelling at the situation. And I had to describe to her, what I was doing, what I was feeling, and try to detach her from the situation. So, and she was really good about it. I mean, she had a lot of empathy and said, okay, I hear you, understand what's going on. Because it really wasn't about her. It was about me, and then her having the grace to let me just, I'm just going to yell at the sky, and the sky doesn't care, right? And so that was really good for us because it didn't set our relationship back. She didn't take it personal. I didn't keep doing it. It wasn't like a perpetual thing. So, but that's the kind of grace. But oftentimes we can't kind of get through those. We kind of get to situations where it is more about some things bothering us. And so we want to talk a little bit about conflict. And the first thing I would say is whenever anybody hears conflict, nobody says, hey, fantastic, can't wait for some of that conflict. When's it coming my way? Well, there are a couple people, but nobody wants to be around them. So, but I want you to know that the amount of conflict in your relationship, that John Gottman, who's the foremost scholar of marriage in the world, says that the conflict is not correlated to the success of the marriage. So the good news is, if you have conflict, it's not that your marriage is failing, okay? It's how you handle the conflict, the process and the repair from conflict that really matters. And that's what we want to talk about now and probably in another podcast as we go forward. So the first thing I would say is, what causes conflict is probably a good way to put it. Well, one is the personalities, right? We just described it. So it's just kind of the irritation of the differences, and particularly being magnified when we're quarantined together. But I think there's some other things that cause it as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment and read out of James 4, because, we're born with a sin nature, right? And so what also is coming into play is basically we're pretty selfish people, and so that's where Christ comes in, where we really have to pray for the Lord to supernaturally impart and give us, a love and a patience and a grace for one another. But in James 4, it says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something, but you don't get it. You kill and you covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and you fight. You do not have because you do not ask God, but when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your own pleasures." So, just our human nature, we're selfish people, and we want what we want when we want it.
Right. And I would say to that, in fact, I did a little talk on this, but one of the things in this season, like that example I gave where I got really agitated and irritated very quickly, in this season, as those things come up, don't just brush them off. I immediately just ask the Lord, what is that about, right? Because it's the Lord's kindness that allows us to see those things in us. And that allows us to surrender those to Him and say, okay, Lord, what are you trying to tell me in this situation? What are you still trying to work out in me? How are you still trying to help me be whole and healthy in you? And so I think we can even use those things as ways to listen to the Lord and to grow in that season, rather than if we try to just brush them off and hide them, guess what? They have a way of coming back out, right? And so it's always about the Lord's process of healing us and making us whole. So I think certainly some of our selfish desires, and I think another thing is expectations, right?
Yes, that's another thing that we really kind of hit hard when we do marriage coaching, is because we have these unmet expectations. Gregg has been maybe, working all week. He's had maybe meetings at night, dinners at night. And so the weekend's coming up, and I'm thinking, well, surely, because he's been gone all week, surely he's going to want to be with me or the kids or do this or do that, and because we haven't been together. And so, but I don't say it. I assume it. And he's thinking, well, I've been working all week. Man, I need some time, whatever, alone, and I want to do this weekend. And he's not telling me that. And because we don't tell each other and communicate that, then we get into fights, because we're like, well, you know me, you would know that I'd be hoping that we'd be having some time this weekend. I mean, surely. And then he disappoints me, and then I get mad because he hasn't seen my need. And it goes around and around and around. So we really say, talk about what you're wanting and you're needing from each other, and say it out and talk about it.
Yeah. And I think the big point here is, our spouse is not a mind reader. Okay? As much as we long for them to know those kinds of things, they don't, okay? So we just need to be forthright, and we need to talk about what our expectation is. I think it's particularly true in this quarantine, because, you may be looking at the schedule and saying, there's a piece here where I'm not homeschooling, and this is what I have expectation-wise, and then you go to your spouse and you find out, I've got a trumpet lesson I have to teach virtually, right? And it's like, and so that lack of really, talking about what your expectations are, how you're going to spend your time, how you're going to, divide up some of the chores, those are the things that really cause a lot of the day-to-day irritations.
That's why the perfect solution is a micromanaging schedule. No, I'm just kidding.
Good luck with
That's
that.
what
I've tried that. It didn't work so well.
I'm just kidding.
But one of the things you can do is just have those conversations about expectations. Get in the habit of regularly saying, hey, what are your expectations for tonight, for tomorrow, for this weekend? And talk them through.
Yes. and keep rolling.
All right. So the other piece we want to talk about is some techniques for handling conflict. And this podcast, we're going to talk about eliminating some toxins from your relationship in the way that you have conflict and argue. And then next podcast, we'll talk about some ways to dissect your conflicts, the types of those, and how to resolve them or deal with them. So let me just kind of kick off with that. And again, this is from John Gottman. You could look it up. There's some really good resources, by the way, if we forget to say that. There are 2 books from John Gottman.
The one is called The Relationship Cure, and the other is The 7 Principles to Making a
Highly Successful Marriage, or something like that.
Too many words in the title.
But there's only one.
Yeah, but we use those, and they're really excellent.
The other thing that I would say is, just want to hit it right up front, is do not be afraid. And in fact, we encourage everybody to kind of have a marriage coaching partner for yourself or a counselor.
Right.
Okay? When we went through a really difficult time in our marriage many years ago, we went significantly time for a year consistently to a marriage counselor. Mm-hmm. And then since then, in the ensuing years, we've always gone to see them either in person or virtually every year to talk about tune-ups in our own marriage or how to deal with adult children or navigate situations that are causing tension in our marriage that don't necessarily have to do with the 2 of us. Mm-hmm. And so please, everybody needs a coach. Everybody needs help, you know. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time, there was a saying, even Michael Jordan needs a coach, right? Well, no matter how good your marriage, you probably everybody needs a coach to stay in tune. But the thing I want to hit on now is to talk about how we can stop doing harm to our marriage, okay? The first motto of any doctor is like, do no further harm, something like that. You physicians will correct me with the exact phrase, because you're precise, and we appreciate that about you. But it's to do no further harm. So when you have conflict, don't do any further damage in that conflict is the goal. And he said there are 4 things that really cause significant damage in a relationship when you consistently engage in them when you're in conflict. And he calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So they come riding in with a mission, right? And I'm just going to go through those. We'll demonstrate a couple. We did such a good job demonstrating these a couple weeks ago that the people actually thought we were having an argument. So if you sense we're having an argument, chances are we're not. If we are, Jenny will tell you whether we are or not. So the first one is this. When you enter into a conflict discussion, many times one person initiates it, and they're usually coming in hot and heavy, right? This has been building up. This is an issue. It sparks in them. And so they come in with a high amount of energy. And so one of the people in your relationship may tend to have a harsh startup. Who would that be in our relationship, do you think? Me or you?
I probably could be more direct, I would say.
Okay. That's a good word for it, direct. But a harsh startup. What does a harsh startup sound like?
You always are defensive. We have talked about this, and you continue to do it. You blame, you blame, you blame. Why do you do that?
I'm not sure, but my counselor is going to help us with this. So, did you see the emotional energy behind that? All
and
right.
The you.
And the you. And so what happens with that is typically it triggers in the receiver, me, either a fight or flight response. So it kind of heightens our own chemicals in our brain, and we either dig in for the return, which I'll get into in a minute, or we just kind of run for cover because the incoming artillery is too great. So a harsh startup is absolutely the fundamental first thing to engaging in conflict productively versus causing turning away. Okay? So I think it's easily recognizable to the person who's receiving it, maybe not so much to the person giving it. So talk to each other about that.
So a soft startup would sound like this. Hey, Gregg, you may not be aware of this, but I wondered if we could, find some time later to talk. The other day, when we had our disagreement, that really hurt my feelings. Yeah. And I wondered if we could talk about, how I felt about that, and if we could maybe work on doing something a little bit more, that wouldn't hurt so much.
No.
So.
Okay. No, I'm kidding. But you see the difference in that and how much easier it is to receive and then to problem solve.
So I'm inviting him into my world of where it hurt me. And so, I said, would you come into my world and hear my heart? And can we talk about his defensiveness, basically, his blame, whatever. So that really is, he's more willing and.
Yep. Yeah, it sets the environment.
Yeah.
That first person who initiates it sets the table. And it's either going to be a table that people will sit down at or run from. Okay? So the second of the four horsemen, the first one, obviously harsh startup. Second one is defensiveness. So this is how the person responds who is receiving somebody who wants to have conflict. This is also Shelley's problem. No, I'm just kidding. That's defensiveness. This is Shelley's problem.
Defensiveness is the blame game.
So who's the defensive one in the relationship? Okay. Yeah, so I have a tendency, probably comes from my desire to want to get things right, do things right, be right. I get defensive, right? So that's not very helpful, though, when you're in conflict. Because right does not help the relationship, right? Being right doesn't make the relationship grow. So what happens oftentimes is that when she brings something up, I'll respond by turning it back on her. Either things that she's doing that are worse or related or that cause it, right? So, yeah, the reason I blew up is because you're driving me crazy, or whatever, something like that. That's defensiveness. And the key to defensiveness, we've actually now, which is a technique for all of these things, we've actually now given my name defensiveness, and we call it left hook.
Oh, left hook, yeah.
Yeah, nice left hook or nice jab. We turn into boxing terms, right? Because I do it less, but when I do it, either she'll call it out, or sometimes I'll call it out. I'll say, oh man, that was a good left hook, wasn't it? It's kind of like that counter punch. And we'll laugh about it, which immediately diffuses the anger and the defensiveness that I've displayed. So that's a great way, identify where you are in some of these four horsemen, and then try to create some humor as you work through it for it. So we've got harsh startup, we've got defensiveness. Third one we have as a response is contempt. And that's really just about facial gestures or body movements. It's really about, where you're basically dissing the person without saying a thing, right? You're looking at them and you're just like, oh man, whoa. Yeah. And you're putting them down. You're, in street terms, you're dissing them. You're not giving them any credibility. And that essentially is a way to respond in which you are trying to, take it, overcome the situation, get on the upper hand. And if you think about both defensiveness and contempt, what it's attempting to do when you're defensive or contempt, you're trying to put the other person down. You're trying to put the blame on them. You're trying to make them seem like they don't know what they're talking about so that you're putting them down. That's why these are so toxic to relationships, because it's very difficult to maintain a healthy emotional relationship if you're spending your time putting the other person in their place and putting them down. That really is about attacking their very identity and nature.
Yeah, their character. It can be sarcasm. It can be just, like you said, like rolling the eyes, like, it's like I have to tolerate him.
Yeah. Here we go again.
Round and around. Yeah. And it just really, like you said, hurts. It hurts your value, your character. You feel like they're demeaning you.
Right.
So that never works.
So, harsh startup, defensiveness, contempt, and then the final of the four horsemen is what's called stonewalling. And that's basically when you just clam up and you don't respond at all. It's like, I'm not going to engage. I'm not even going to look at you. I'm not going to give you the time of day. I'm going to pretend you don't exist. This issue doesn't exist. I'm going to go in and watch the game, or I'm going to go in and read a book, and you're not going to get into my world.
Or you can do what I used to do when we were very first married, because I saw my mother do this, is she would go in the room and shut the door on my dad and give him the silent treatment, and sometimes for a long time. And I didn't like that about my mom at all. And we're very early in our years, I found myself doing that with Gregg. We'd get in a fight, and I'd go in the room, and I'd shut the door, and I'd lock it, and he'd be like knocking on the door, Shelley. And
come on out and play.
And I'm like, I'm not coming out there. I was like, you kidding me? I wouldn't come out there. But you know what? The Holy Spirit convicted me and she said, you're acting like your mother. And I did not want to do that because I saw how that was destructive in my parents' marriage. I got on my knees and I said, Lord, forgive me. And then the thing, and how I call it the three-legged stool. One, you have to realize you're doing it. Two, you go to the Lord and you say, you repent, and the Lord help me. But the third of the three-legged stool is the hardest, and most of us don't opt to do it. I had to open the door. I had to go out and sit down and talk it through with Gregg, which is the last thing I wanted to do. I was stonewalled. I wanted to shut him out, because he hurt me, and I didn't want to let him in. But the more I would go to the table and talk, the less, it was like the Lord healed that. And over, time, I don't even think about doing that. But I was really good at stonewalling.
Yeah. And you don't do that anymore.
No.
I mean, that's a testament to the fact that you can stop these behaviors. In fact, when we were going through this in counseling, and our counselor brought this up to us, he asked us to identify these different things, and of course, I was identified as being defensive, and which I'm not, by the way. But anyways, and so I asked him, very studiously. I just said, counselor, do you have any ideas for how I can stop this? And he looked at me and he goes, yeah, just quit it, stop doing it. And I said, okay, well, that's pretty straightforward. And the idea is that it's a choice you make now that you're aware of it. And if you choose to engage it, it's more like self-indulgence to want to get, the right, the upper hand, versus, in love, serving one another and just choosing not to do it. So that's really, with some awareness now and identifying what your weaknesses are, really choosing not to do it is key. And then the last thing I would say, and then we'll wrap this up in a minute, is that if you get into a conflict, sometimes Gottman says you get to a point where he says you are flooded. And what he means by that is that your brain has depleted all the brain chemicals that have fully set your fight and flight response out. And when you're in that brain mode, you no longer can have a rational, constructive conversation, okay? You are likely to engage in one of these four horsemen. So if you get to the point where you're flooded in a conversation, each person should have the right to say, time out, I'm flooded. And then he says to wait, I think it's about 40 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, till those chemicals dissipate, and then re-engage. And it's important that we re-engage.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
Not to leave it hanging, set a time and come back and talk about it.
Hold on, before you guys have your final thoughts, I just want to invite anyone that's on with us live right now to submit any questions you have, and you can do that by just typing it in the comment box, because I want to make sure we honor that if you have any. So
good. You
can kind of share some final thoughts and
good.
Roll with the questions if you have them.
So, now that we've kind of talked about those four horsemen, you become aware of them. You really exercise some discipline by taking them out of your conflict, situation, whether it's a harsh startup, defensiveness, contempt, or stonewalling. And then again, if either of the parties gets flooded, you just say I'm flooded, and that everybody gets an automatic timeout for 30 to 45 minutes.
And when you come back after that flooding, it's important that you repair. Always repair. We were horrible at that. We never got to the other side of conflict. We were terrible at it. And then through this, and it's hard. It's hard to sit down because you're angry and you want to. But if you get that flooding down and you come back, agree to meet, that's when you do your repair and you try to practice these again and help each other in that as you're learning them, because you don't get them perfect. It's over time, by doing it, practicing it, you see the rewards of it.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, managing conflict well as a couple is like anything else. You have to practice it to get better at it. We aren't born with the skill to be able to do this. In fact, it gets harder sometimes because we don't handle it well at first, creating a larger gap to fill. So really have some patience with each other.
Yeah, and to see that we're for each other. And I invite Gregg in to help me. When I don't do it well, when I start with that harsh startup, I've given him permission to say, wait, that was really harsh. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right. All right, so let's try again, like rewind the tape. And I got to think, all right, because it's not natural just to come on with a soft startup. It's like I've got passion, I'm upset, but I have to think, all right, if I really want to solve this and invite him into this, I've got to have a redo. So I give him permission. We do each other to redo, and we call each other out on it to help each other get better, so we have a thriving marriage.
Yeah, I think if you have a perspective that says, we always tell people this when we're marriage coaching, when you're in conflict, if you are face-to-face with the knives out, you're going to inflict some wounds. And if you instead could picture this, that instead you're fighting back to back. Everything in this world, from just the amount of stress we have, the amount of demands we placed on us, the enemy, everything fights against a unified, thriving marriage. If we turn on each other face to face and start inflicting wounds, there's not much chance we're going to make it well or have a thriving marriage. It may just be a surviving marriage. So really encourage you to get that picture, and then to know that you're in it together. You're in it to win it. We can offer a lot of hope. We had to learn these things even after 25 years of marriage. When we started really diving in to learn some of these techniques, this year we'll be married 40 years. She was 10 and I was 12 when we got married. But, it really, and I would say the last, 15, 12 years have been the best years of our marriage. So we would just want to encourage you with that.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions.
That's how well we explained it. Good job, team.
So we're going to wrap this up, and we are going to be doing a part 2 sometime soon. So just so you guys know that, we'll be coming back for a part 2. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah. You want to give them a little, just tell them what we'll be talking about next time real quick so that...
Okay, next time we're going to talk more about conflict. As I kind of said at the outset, we're going to help you understand the types of conflict that relationships have, how to diagnose them, and then some techniques for maybe resolving them in a way that moves your relationship forward rather than backwards.
Solvable versus perpetual conflict things, and then maybe a little bit of bidding too, which is really huge.
Very good. Want to pray us out?
Yes. So, Heavenly Father, we just thank you that you are a God that is for us. You are the God of the covenant marriage, Lord. That, Father, that we have a tremendous resource in our weakness, and that is you. And so, Lord, we just say we invite you into our marriages, into our homes, Lord, and that we remember we can't do it ourselves, and that we're broken and we're weak, but we have a God that is for us, a God that imparts truths into our lives, and it just it gives us grace. Lord, may we be gracious with each other. So, Lord, we just thank you for one another. We thank you that you are the God of the process, and we say yes to partnering with you in our marriages, and we just say thank you in the name of Jesus.
And Lord, we just bless the people listening. We bless their relationships, the marriages, Father. I pray that regardless of what we said, that they would hear exactly what they need to hear for their marriage to move forward in new ways, that you open up for them greater intimacy, greater joy, greater purpose, and greater unity. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.